Hello everybody, it's 2 o'clock, so we'll start. I'm Sophie Lansdowne and I'm the Programme Manager for Quality Improvement here at the Care Foundation. Thank you for joining our webinar today on using patient and staff experiences to redesign services. Everybody's currently in listening only mode, so everybody's muted, but please do use the chat box at the bottom if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask us or any points you'd like to raise, and we'll address those as we go through. Can everybody hear us okay, just to double check the technology to begin with? If anybody could just write in the box if you can hear us, that would be really great. Yes, brilliant, great. Well, on that note, we can begin. So I'm here with Catherine Dale, who is the Director of Patient Safety at the Academic Health Science Network, the Health Innovation Network. So Catherine is a very instrumental member of our Point of Care Foundation Quality Improvement faculty, and she has extensive experience-based co-design, and that really focuses on using staff and patients' experiences to redesign services, to design improvements, and it's a huge part of our patient-focused quality improvement here at the Point of Care Foundation. So I'll hand over to Catherine in a minute, but for now I'll just introduce the Point of Care Foundation and what we hope to cover with the webinar today. So we're an independent charity, and our mission is to humanise healthcare. So for this, that we believe that working collaboratively with staff, patients, service users and their family is paramount. We believe that in order to radically improve the way that people are cared for, we need to support the staff who deliver care. So for this, we run initiatives to provide staff support, as well as our patient-centred quality improvement work, which provides frontline staff with the tools to work in collaboration with their patients and families to improve experiences. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So what do we mean by patient-centred quality improvement? Quality improvements are methodologies through which to achieve change in the system, and our tools provide, so our quality improvement provides tools to put patients and families at the very centre of their care, to put their lived experiences as the very focus of improvement efforts, to ensure that care is really responsive to patients and their families' needs, their values, and their preferences. So our work comes and is based upon 2 key methodologies, which are very much evidence-based and really do put the experiences of patients, families, and also the staff who care for them right at the heart in order to identify the improvements which matter most to them. So these 2 methodologies are patient and family-centred care, and this is really quite unique in that it has a big focus on patient shadowing to provide an avenue for a real genuine insight into the care experience through the eyes of patients and their families, and to really create that urgency for change. The second is experience-based co-design, which, having gained this true insight, teaches staff and patients and families to work collaboratively in quite a radical way to design improvements together. We work with frontline, clinical and multidisciplinary teams, taking them through whole quality improvement cycles, teaching and using tools that make sure patients remain at the very centre. And with this, we really aim to build capacity, so the tools that we teach can be used regularly and are not just part of a one-off project. I'll talk a little bit more about the programmes later, but for now I'm going to hand over to Catherine to talk about our co-design work and the impact it's had. So again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll either sort of answer them as we go through or at the very end.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Catherine Dale, and as Sophie said, I'm currently the Programme Director for Patient Safety in an academic health science network in South London, which is called the Health Innovation Network. But I got involved working with the Point of Care Foundation and its former iteration in the King's Fund when I was working in cancer services, mainly in Guy's and St Thomas's Trusts. And I helped to develop the toolkit, which is on the King's Fund website, which teaches people in more depth about how to go about doing experience-based co-design type projects. And I currently help train people up in this method because basically I enjoyed it so much, and I think it's a really powerful way of changing health services and focusing on experience. So I would say that I'll move to the next slide. Sorry. So this is the slide seems to have disappeared. 1 second, we'll go back to it. But anyway, to explain that experience-based co-design is a method that was developed by some academic researchers, but who wanted to improve the way in which quality improvement methods were focusing, so that they really change experiences for patients. And the kind of methodological background to it is it's a participatory action research approach that combines a user-centered orientation and a collaborative change process. So the user-centered orientation is where we get the experience-based. So that means that it focuses on the experience that users have of a service. And then the collaborative change process, the co-design elements, are where we get staff and patients to work together to improve services. So it is different to, I had a background in service improvement, so I learnt some of the methods of how you go about improving services, but they didn't focus on experience and they didn't get staff and patients to work alongside each other. So that's where this is different in both those aspects. So people are always really intrigued as to what the patients, what they contribute, how they participate in this activity. I'd just like to make a caveat. When we say patients here, we mean people who are effectively accessing health services or services more generally. So it might be service users in a mental health setting, and it also might be carers or families of patients who are going through health or mental health services. I'll probably keep using the word patients, but I'd like you to think a bit more broadly because it's all of those people who are accessing services. So the things that patients do are they start by sharing their own personal experiences. So they tell us what it is that they have been through. They explain to us kind of the impact that those experiences have had as well. It's not just described, I think you'll know from yourself or your friends or your relatives or the patients that you've encountered, either formally or informally. When we tell stories about health experiences, we tend to have quite a lot of emotional content, the goods and bads, the highs and lows of what's happened. And actually, experience-based co-design really uses that as part of the intelligence, the kind of the data that is gathered, but also as a fuel for bringing about change. So then, it's not just about sharing experiences, which, to be fair, we've got relatively good at in health now. We've got a lot of people who are sharing experiences, but the thing about experience-based co-design is that it also takes you on a journey of what you're going to do once you've understood what people are saying. And you're going on that journey still with those patients. You aren't just as a member of staff, and I speak primarily as a member of staff myself, you don't just go off and go, well, right, we've heard from the patients, now we know what we've got to fix. And we're going to fix it, and hopefully that'll be fine. So instead of doing that, we have much more of a, okay, we've heard from the patients, we think we get some insights into what's important to them. We need to keep checking, that we're getting right what's important. So we're asking them as a group to collectively identify what's important. And then we get them to work with staff on developing and designing solutions to those important things. And they then get involved in the implementation of those solutions as well. So they're involved at every stage of the journey. And at the end, we end up celebrating the achievements alongside patients as well, and they may continue to be involved in other activities. So they're involved throughout the stages. So the process itself is more than just a quality improvement, as most quality improvement methods are. They're kind of practical tools. They're approaches to things, but actually this is also about a mindset. For me, something that really happened through my involvement in experience-based co-design projects was I it just something really clicked. I suddenly really understood the value that working alongside patients could bring, the way in which really listening to what's important to patients can help us be more efficient, because we're understanding what's the best moment for that piece of information to be transferred to people, not just kind of like, right, we need to give people information, but when are they most receptive to it? I'm thinking of what the work that I did with breast cancer patients, and one of the things that happens following breast cancer surgery is that you're at risk of developing lymphedema, which is kind of water collection in your arms and other places. And the physiotherapists, I remember the physiotherapists having a conversation with some women who'd been through breast cancer and talking to them. They need to be given a series of exercises to encourage them to reduce the risk of getting this. But when people are first diagnosed with breast cancer, they are absolutely overwhelmed by that diagnosis, and they are given masses and masses of information about cancer. So giving somebody information about lymphedema at that point would probably be relatively unhelpful. So the physiotherapist talked through with the patient, when's the best moment? Is it when you're actually in hospital post-surgery? If you're in hospital at that point, there's lots of day case surgery. So I think they came to the conclusion, it was a little while ago now, but it was something like a few days later, physiotherapists contacting people. They were given a leaflet earlier on, but it was a reminder that that's something that they might want to be thinking about at that point. So those sorts of conversations are so valuable. So this came about, experience-based co-design as a method, came about through the work of Professor Glenn Roberts and Professor Paul Bates. And they originally wrote a book all about bringing user experience into healthcare improvement. And they have gone on, and other people have gone on, to build up a really strong research evidence base about this as an approach, about the changes that it makes. So if you or people that you wish to influence would really welcome kind of evidence and peer-reviewed journal type information, there's going to be a list towards the end of these slides of some useful resources around that, and there's also resources on that in the King's Fund toolkit on experience-based co-design. But basically the approach came out of design theory. So in the design sciences, when people are looking at development, they actually do focus on experience, either opposed to or alongside the systems and the processes. And actually this meant that the idea was to take much more of sort of stories from people and listening to them telling what it was like to go through a service, rather than the traditional approach, which this slide I think really explains very well. So classic and very common and very powerful and important quality improvement and service improvement methods focus on two of these elements, the performance and the engineering of our systems. So performance being all about functionality, efficiency, and these things are hugely important. And when we're thinking about redesigning outpatient clinics or services so that we can work well within the resources we've got, these are really valuable tools. And also very much driven by the patient safety end of things, which is obviously a field close to my heart. There's a real stress and importance around the safety and the reliability of our systems and the way in which we're working. What Glenn Roberts and Paul Bates really noticed was that we weren't really paying much attention to the aesthetics. What does it feel like to go through a service, both from a physical environment point of view and also the human environment? And that was something that they really felt was missing, but that we could learn from the design sciences about how to go about gaining that insight. So experience-based co-design does help you look at those aspects in particular. So it's all very well, we can talk about this, but why should you bother? And there are, as I said, there's a lot of resources on the toolkit that tell you kind of like things that people have done. Sorry, that's a screenshot of the resources. I'm going to pass. Oh no, sorry. Bear with me. I'm just having a technology. Sorry. Yeah, this is a screenshot from the toolkit. That's a little picture of me. There's some videos of me talking on it and other people as well. So don't worry, all the time. But Glenn, Robert, and colleagues have been following up on experience-based co-design projects and have kind of been keeping a tally of the work that's gone on, and it's really spreading. So it's been happening in 6 countries across the world, 59 projects, and a further 27 were in planning. This was in 2013, so further things have carried on since then. So also it's really useful to know that it's been implemented in many different clinical areas. So from emergency medicine departments, drug and alcohol services and mental health settings, many places in cancer, paediatrics, so working with children, and as well as those ones, people with learning disabilities. There's services around that have been using it, and also recently some work in stroke rehabilitation. So there's many different settings where people have found this to be a valuable approach. The projects do take around about 6 to 12 months, and the online resource is really helpful when people are going through each of the steps. So this is just an example of some of the different locations around the world that are using experience-based co-design, and some of the information that's available about those. So the approach itself has 6 stages to it. The first one is around setting up the project. Then there's collecting the staff experiences, collecting the patient experiences, the co-design event where you bring the patients and staff together, making the changes, and celebrating and reviewing, and then moving on to the next thing. So starting with the setting up, this actually follows in lots of ways any kind of quality improvement activity. So whenever you're setting up a project, you have to be thinking about the usual things. What else is going on in the organisation or the setting that you're talking about? Is this going to be a completely separate project, or is it going to be aligned with the other work that is happening? Usually better to align it, I would say. But one of the things that is different about experience-based co-design is often when we're looking at quality improvement, we focus on either a team or a service. And once you're talking about an experience of health settings, you have to think about it from the point of view of the people who are having that experience. So for example, in breast cancer, when we looked at inviting people to events and were thinking about staff that we would involve, it was a case of thinking about who were the breast cancer team. And that primarily involved quite a lot of the people, the doctors, and obviously the nursing staff who were providing care to patients who were experiencing cancer. So they might have been involved in the diagnosis, they might have been involved in surgery, they might have been involved in the chemotherapy. But one group that we forgot to involve was the day surgery people. And it turned out that a lot of the breast cancer patients actually went through the day surgery unit. So do think, when you're gaining insight into what is the scope of your project, do think in terms of where are the kind of key places that a patient might have this experience. So you might need to involve people that you wouldn't traditionally think of as part of that service or team. There's also kind of thoughts about how to structure it, the governance structure, how to engage with people such as the more senior stakeholders. It is a different sort of approach. One of the things that's different is that normally when we're doing quality improvement, we are there to solve a problem. The thing with experience-based co-design is you kind of have to start from not knowing what the problem is, because you have to gain the insights of both the staff and the patients to really understand the problem. So you might have some idea, but don't assume that you know all of the things that are important, because you might have got it wrong. And that is quite challenging. That was one of the things that I found quite different. So when you're going to sort of engage people at the start and you're trying to say, yeah, we're going out there to look for problems, that sometimes can come across slightly unhelpful. But obviously, don't say that. Say it much more. You're trying to gain insight into the things that are working really well and the things that might need some improvement, both from the staff perspective and from the patient perspective. And you kind of need an appetite for doing a piece of work like that in order to do this well. A really, really key thing, if you don't quite know where to begin, observation. Observation is one of the most underutilised tools in quality improvement. It's relatively cheap. You just need a couple of people for a couple of hours to sit in a place, really. There's lots of information both on the experience-based co-design toolkit and also the patient and family-centred care toolkit, which is on the Point of Care Foundation website, about observation as a method. But as I said, it's only a couple of people sitting somewhere for a couple of hours is probably as straightforward as that, and then taking notes on the things that they are noticing, and also doing that in such a way that that the staff know what you're doing, and any patients that you're explaining what you're doing, and you're gaining insight into the things that are happening in that place. And here are a couple of slides to show you what the sorts of things you might find. So this is the point, a reception from the patient perspective, and then this is the same reception point from the point of view of the member of staff. And you can see just how powerful having those two photos are. Now, people probably, it's amazing what you kind of become immune to on a day-to-day basis. So people would probably be aware that that was a thing, but they just weren't paying attention to it because the staff would have just got used to it because it's become quite normal. But putting those things on a slide is really powerful, and having people sort of talk about it and do something about it. The next, or part of this stage really, is around collecting staff experiences, and it's really interesting that we focus on staff first of all when we're looking at improving experiences for patients, because we are wishing to improve experiences for staff as well. And it's really interesting to find that some of the things that are frustrating to staff are equally frustrating to patients. The other very key thing is that actually you can't do any of this without staff. It's really, really important to get people on board, to get them understanding what you're trying to do. You may be a member of a staff team and you wish to do that, do a piece of work in your own area. So obviously you'll realise how important it will be to work with your colleagues in order to get anything changed right from the start. And also just to kind of like, people have quite a lot of fear about involving patients and things. They're quite kind of like worried about what it's going to mean, and how patients will probably come in and tell them that everything's really dreadful and that we need to spend millions and millions. So it's actually allowing some of that fear to be out there, because in my experience it hasn't ever turned out to be like that. But if people are worried about that, then at least allowing them to acknowledge that so that you can address it is really key. Also, if you don't work in that particular place, staff will be really, really key for helping you recruit patients and other service users to get involved in the activity. Research from Australia found that the best way to invite somebody to participate in something like this is to have a member of staff who had already had contact with that patient invite them along to something. So you can have someone behind the scenes doing all the work, but the person who makes that contact, either the named person in the letter or perhaps brings someone up, it's really helpful if that's somebody who has had previous contact with the patient. And that was actually that was from an A&E department So that's really useful to know, whilst bearing in mind that it is going to take time and effort to recruit patients. So you do need to think about how that is resourced if you've got a lot of busy people around. So once you have had activity where you've really gained insight from the staff, which might be through the observation and also through interviewing people, then you bring the staff together and you collate the feedback from them as a group, and you help them prioritise what they think is most important. So having the staff together as a collective group is really key, and it's quite like a straightforward facilitated workshop, as you would often do in a service improvement type activity. But also, if you're remembering that you might well be bringing staff who don't normally get together in a room together because they're all part of the same experience for the patient, but they aren't necessarily part of the same team. So it's great to do that before you then go on to get them to meet with the patients later on in the process. So then we move on to collecting patients' experiences. And there is a great deal of information in the toolkit on interviewing and filming patients. So filming patients is one of the key parts of the experience-based co-design methodology. It is something that we do encourage people to do. And when we started doing this ages ago, and something like, well, I started doing this in 2008, we all used to have video cameras and tripods and everything. And nowadays, we probably have much more straightforward technology with phones and online editing equipment. It's actually become so much more straightforward to do filming. But there's lots of really good tips on the website. But we would encourage that as an activity, because being able to show films of patients talking about services is really, really powerful as a trigger for bringing about change. That's what the evidence has really shown. People often want to know about recruitment, and as I said, one of the top tips is around having a member of staff who's had a previous contact with the patient, be the person who the invitation comes from, at least in name. Other things are getting staff to sort of identify people who have a story, so people who have had some sort of an experience of the service and who might well be interested in using that as a means of making things better. I would also say that it's effectively a kind of quota sampling. You can kind of decide how many people you're talking about and how long you'll sort of take to recruit people. But you can really actively go for a range of different voices. So you might want to think about different age groups, obviously different genders, if that works for the type of service that you're looking at, different ethnic backgrounds, different levels of education, maybe different parts of the country. Just go for diversity, because that adds credence to the information that you get, and people can't kind of categorize that it's just that type of person. And also, I also find that it's really funny for how people categorize people according to what's wrong with them. So in cancer, people would talk about breast patients like they were a certain type of person, and different types of cancer would be different types of people. So actually, if you can demonstrate that within a group, a cohort, that people often think of as one type of person, that there's a range of differences, that's really valuable, and also can mean that you can have quite a creative approach to what improvements might look like and how to develop services that will be useful for that range of people. There are some more tips on how to get stories out of people. It is a bit more than just sitting someone in front of a camera and just asking them to tell their story. So there is sort of a bit of preparation, but really being quite open-ended. So encouraging them to tell the story in their way, because you'll piece things together when you're editing, and that kind of pulls out the themes across different people. and just be really open-ended with people and listening and empathy. So it does take time because you need to help people feel comfortable to tell their story, but it is really, really powerful once you get something from patients. And then you bring the patients together as a group. And again, it's really funny because some of the elements of experience-based co-design are very simple, but they're really important. I think too often, in my experience, when we involve patients in things, we involve a patient or maybe two patients, and we expect them to come along to something which even some of the staff might find a bit tricky, and just get on with it and represent patients. And what is really great about EBCD is one of the elements, and this is something that I've really kind of capitalised on, even if I'm not doing a full-blown EBCD project, is when you get a bunch of patients together, there's real power in that. And some of that power actually comes from tension and diversity. So you won't necessarily have everyone agreeing all the time, but that's really important as well, because actually not all patients are the same and not all people are the same. You know, it's a radical thought, really. But in the patient event, again, more detail in the toolkit and on the training. If you come along on the training course, we do a one-day training course that gives you lots more detail on this. But one of the things that we do is use an emotional mapping process, which helps people to articulate how they felt about each stage of the process. And by articulating that, it really brings out the key things that it's going to be worth doing some work on. I won't say more about that now, but there is a bit more to it. But it's a very, very powerful tool for getting insight into an experience as opposed to a process. So then, once we've had the separate staff event and the patient event, we bring the people together. We bring the patient and the staff together for a co-design event. And we're moving into the co-design phase. Now, at that joint event where we're bringing staff and patients together, again, you would show the film. Sorry, I didn't mention that. At the patient event, you are showing the patients the film for the first time. And then the joint event where you bring the staff and patients together, this is the first time that the staff see the film. And it's really incredible that the staff see the film for the first time with the patients in the room. So they then get to discuss directly with a lot of people who've been on that film, kind of what does that mean, or tell me more about that, or wow, I had no idea that was a thing, or I can't believe that that's a thing. That's also something that frustrates us as staff. There's some really amazing conversations that take place. So that's another absolutely basic, fundamental, but really powerful thing about EBCD is it's all about the conversations between the patient and the staff together, and that is really at the heart of it. And those conversations then are about what are we going to do about this. So you go through a process of helping people identify what are the most important things to work on, and then you ask them to do some work on those. And those tend to be in short-term kind of working groups where you make the changes. They're facilitated working groups which have patients in them, again, continuing to be involved. So as and when the interventions and the improvements are designed and developed, patients are right there, part of that process. So that's where we really think that the experience-based the co-design element does take us a step further than we tend to get to in quality improvement. So in the worst case scenario, we're not listening at all to the users, and the staff, the professionals, just get on with doing the designing. The second option is we listen to the feedback that people give us, but then we go off and do the designing. But this co-design is all about really listening to users and then going off with them to do the designing together and to test things out and to see if those things are going to make the changes that people are really hoping to see. So And then that brings us to the final or launch stage, depending on how you approach it, which is about celebration. And again, a radical thing in quality improvement that I've not encountered before, marking achievements at the end of a project. Sometimes, I don't know about other people's experience, but I hear it's common that you don't necessarily so much mark the end, you more move on to the next thing. But it's actually really great to have that moment where you are celebrating achievements, you're bringing together people who've been involved at every stage of the way. Not everybody will necessarily remain as involved throughout, but just reflecting on what's been achieved and that side of things is extremely powerful and helps you then to think and refocus and launch into other activities, which hopefully you'll be inspired to do, and you'll have energy from the participants, both staff and patients, to move on to other things. So the things that I would really say that we learnt, I think I was really anxious about, particularly around bringing staff and patients together in this way, that it would be quite confrontational, and it is very much an approach that is extremely constructive. You're asking people to work on something together, and even if there are moments of differences of opinion, it's in the context of what are we going to do about things and resolving matters. So I think that's extremely useful. Patients want efficiency. I think it's not incompatible with other elements and drivers for quality improvement. People don't want us wasting money, they don't want us wasting the resources, and they don't want us wasting their time. And some of those things are really similar. So don't assume that this is a luxury that we shouldn't be doing. It's absolutely essential and really, really key. I do think that whole idea that patients see the whole picture, they do take a different approach and have a different lens on some of the services. Often as staff, we very much focus on our bits, and they actually help us see the work that we're doing in the context of other things. The small things really matter. Some of the stuff that you end up working on seems quite trivial, but it can be extremely important to people. And that's not to say that it's not quite a bit of effort. Sometimes fixing a small problem can be quite effortful. But also then the thing that the staff really enjoy it. It is something that is, it kind of helps people get back in touch with why they're doing the work in the first place, and that side of things. It's very powerful. It's very affirming, even if there are times when some of the feedback that you get can be tough, because you're hearing the difficult things in the context of making it better. Actually, that's really valuable, and patients are often kind of really generous with the contributions that they make, and that's something that can be really heartwarming for people. So as I said, there is plenty of information about with kind of evidence and more detail on this as an approach. So that's I just need to quickly scan that.
We will also circulate all the slides so you can have those to look up on the internet.
Great. I'm handing that to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Catherine. So we've had a question from Julia, which I'm not sure if you're aware of anything within this context at the moment, but to your knowledge, is there any experience of EBCD being used in the context of disability or spinal cord injury?
I don't know absolutely explicitly, but we could probably
Find out.
Yeah. But I would say that that so many of the principles are it's a very flexible approach for working in different contexts. So it would definitely, even if somebody hadn't actually done that, it would be possible to get tips from other people that would be relevant for the specifics.
Definitely. Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask? I'll just give people a few seconds if they want to start typing any questions. I can see Linda is typing a question today. No? But we'll definitely look into that for you, Julia. We can get in touch if we can find information around particular subjects in that. for a few minutes just to ask any questions they'd like to.
Tips on getting staff on board.
Very good question.
Yeah. Actually, I would say one of the tips is really get some insight into where the staff are at. Observation can actually be a really good engagement tool. I learned that from one of the colleagues who did that in a mental health setting, but who turned out she'd been a kind of anthropologist or something in her past, so she taught me all about that. But because if you use observation really well, you can demonstrate to people that you're trying to gain insight into the challenges that they are having. I think part of the way this can be positioned, and my previous job title was program manager for patient-centered care, and so I went along to and the project was called patient-centered care, and my mum said kind of as opposed to what, because obviously all care is patient-centered, and also that's what the doctors that I met also thought. So they basically felt that their work was already patient-centered, so who in the heck was I coming along with this job title and this project that effectively implies that they're not patient-centered? Be careful what you call things when you write it, and do frame it in such a way that it is about enhancing the experience for all, not setting up patients against staff. It is about enhancing things so that the staff are better placed to deliver an excellent service to people, because there are ways in which sometimes you can be pulled in a different direction. So this is about redressing some of that, I think. So be careful what you call it, and make sure it's meaningful to staff and patients, and work with it. And also, it's a change project. You will encounter anxiety, resistance. That's all normal. So work with people and take them on the journey with you. And it is a journey. It is a kind of it's an activity of ongoing engagement with people. So I don't think you need to feel like you have to have everyone on board from day one before you can start anything. You probably start with some people who are really keen and get it, and so kind of help them to sort of help you get other people on board as well.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, just to echo what you were saying about observation, we find with the frontline teams that we work with that very much things like observation. We also do a lot around patient shadowing. All of the teams are always telling us just what an impact that has on them, that it really does provide that real genuine insight into what the care experience is really like for patients and their families, and kind of shows them the immediate priorities of possibly what they thought needed improving actually isn't what is the priority for the patients and their families, and it really does begin that kind of whole new way of looking at things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's really what we focus on in terms of the tools that we use within our quality improvement. So we have another question about the difference between co-production and experience-based co-design.
Okay, well, I think people have written endless articles, and but in my mind, so please feel free to Google. Also, people do use these terms a lot, and they mean all sorts of different things. So beware of that. Yeah. But I would say co-design is about involving patients in the activity to improve services. Co-production is much more about the delivery of services. So often it is places where patients or service users are helping. Well, sometimes it's about them helping to shape what those services should be, where they should be focused entirely. So you might get people who are much more responsible for delivering a service, or at least co-responsible for delivering a service. I would say co-production is even more radical, and puts more power into the hands of patients. And in some settings, that is absolutely the right thing to do. It's just that in lots of health settings, when you're trying to effectively take people on a journey of greater involvement and greater understanding of the value that patients can bring. Co-design is a slightly kind of less, it's power sharing, and lots of influence as well. Co-design is very much around highly valuing the influence that patients can have, but the responsibility still very much sits with the staff. It's not patients taking over, as it were. Obviously, depending on where you're coming from, that sort of language can be quite loaded. So if you need me to explain that further, then please do. But I do think that co-design is very much about partnership between patients and staff, and in the designing, the development, the improvement of services.
Yeah. Thank you. So who are the main people who seem to start projects? Patients, or staff, and if it's staff, which sort of staff?
Okay. So yeah, I would say you could have it starting anywhere, and then that would come back to the context of the organisation and the setting. The staff that have started pieces of work might be people who have worked in. So my background is quality improvement, having done work on things like 18-week pathway and the national programme for IT, so quite high national programmes, as well as little service improvements within a particular department in a hospital. You also will have people who have come into that from a clinical background. I don't have a clinical background, but we other colleagues, like Mel has a nursing background, and she's worked in doing quality improvement work, and then Neil from Oxley's is an art therapist. There is no kind of limitations on the role that the person might have. I think there is something around having enough backing to get something off the ground, and to have, you probably would need a senior champion of some sort to kind of, with some kind of backing and insight to go, yes, this is something that is worth exploring more. And I'm not aware of experience-based co-design projects being started by patients or service users, other than, having said that, ResearchNet. So in Oxley's, they had set up already a ResearchNet, which was a network of mental health service users who got together on a regular basis and identified areas for research primarily. And then when they started getting involved in using the experience-based co-design methodology, they then identified areas in which to do this. So yes, it has. That has also happened.
Yeah, and they lead the working groups that do this work, go to the awards. So they definitely do that. I mean, I think we find that it's a whole range of people, primarily staff, that come to us and want to get involved in our work, and very much multidisciplinary. We do tend to work multidisciplinary.
Yeah, and I would say that that when it's patient-led, it's then just really valuable to be thinking that that's then going to be developing the partnership with the staff. So again, having people who will champion that as an approach and who will see the real value in that activity, I think that would always be the context for that.
Definitely. So while we're on the note of starting projects, can projects be started by volunteers and governors? Would it be within their reach?
Again, I would totally say that depends on the context of the organisation and what people understand governors and volunteers to be responsible for. I'm slightly thinking in my brain, and my very first job in the NHS was managing volunteers. That was managing volunteers in a hospital, and I think what you've got to kind of work out is where does responsibility and what you might have is somebody who precipitates a piece of work, But there's a difference between going, this is a really great idea, and then actually doing the work. I wouldn't want people to think that this is the sort of thing that you can just, anybody can just, there are elements of it that anybody can do, but actually to take people through an experience-based co-design project is work, does take resources and does take skills. It does take sort of facilitation type skills, but actually the best approach would be having a team of people, because you're very unlikely to have one person who is really good at every single aspect. So I have much more strength in facilitating meetings than I do interviewing individuals, actually. So it's really interesting that you've got what you would tend to need is a bunch of people kind of working on it. So therefore, I would see that governors or volunteers could very much be a part of that team, but I would find it quite unlikely that people in a non-paid type role would take on the full responsibility for a project of this scale, because I would see that as a much more of a paid role from sort of coordinating it.
Yeah, definitely being involved. So have there been any situations where patients' feedback has been about customer service, which then creates tension at the joint patient and staff?
Oh, there's all sorts of feedback about customer service type. But interestingly, I don't think that kind of feedback necessarily causes tension. There's probably something slightly more specific underneath that question, so I'm just having to kind of guess. But if people are being really specific about an individual, and it's really obvious to everyone who they're talking about, that's obviously potentially something that can cause tension. But most of the time, the things that people, and you have to slightly be a little bit careful about how you edit the film and that sort of thing. But most of the time, a lot of the things that people describe are much more about effectively the system or the way in which the services are run. So it's not as specific as individuals, or but also, I mean, that is what you're there to do. You are there to get feedback. You are there to hear, this is what it feels like. Do you know what? When we arrived, and there was one example where I think this was through observation, actually, when people were, the first appointments in a clinic were at 9 o'clock in the morning, but people were arriving earlier than that, and they were ending up sitting in the dark because there was no staff there before 9 o'clock in the morning. So patients were arriving early and then sitting in the dark for half an hour, and that's just really shocking and not right. But you kind of need people to point it out in order to fix that sort of thing. And as I said, I mean, I think tension is something that has to be not. It's kind of like you will get a bit of tension, but in a good way, because you'll have areas of focus, areas that will kind of precipitate to the top, that is like, actually, these are things we can do something about, so therefore we need work on them. Or also sometimes just like, actually, that's such an impossible problem, we can't do anything about it. Like sometimes if it's ICD issues, but then sometimes the staff will explain that to the patients, and they'll go, okay, no, we get that now, because you've explained to us how big a deal that is and how difficult that will be to change. So let's not focus on that, let's focus on something else. So that was a very long answer to that question.
That was great. So Hazel says that they've started a patient experience group at their new research centre, and they're aiming to have some research started for their patients. So I mean, that sounds really interesting, and we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
Be happy to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your work around that. And Julian's asked, from your experience, how many people, so sort of the core team, do you think it needs for a successful project?
I think rather than answering it that way, I think it's important to think about the skills required. So they would be things like interviewing people, observation, and what's the other? Facilitating meetings. You definitely will need people with experience of facilitating meetings. I'd only facilitated staff alone meetings before I got involved in the first project of this, but it was having had experience of facilitating staff meetings, this was a natural next step. What other things are there? So it isn't necessarily a number, it is about having the right range of skills and the right support. So it's also about being able to have the time to do it, the time to recruit people, to engage people, and also some of it is kind of the logistics of having a space to meet, that sort of thing. So, but also don't try and do it all on your own, because that's quite ambitious.
Yep. So I think that's all of the questions that have come up for now. So thank you very much for all of your questions. We just have a quick slide here, sort of, this just demonstrates how we work with frontline teams, kind of the process that we take them through. So this is a little bit of a modular structure, and it very much mirrors the experience-based co-design process that Catherine's been telling us about. So we teach all sorts of things at the discovery stage, which is really getting that insight into the patient and family's experience. So that's things like shadowing and observation, interviewing and filming, and emotional mapping. The definition stage is where we sort of work with teams to really turn that insight into tangible goals for improvement, the things that they really want to focus on, and the improvements they want to make, and also how they will know that that is an improvement. Then the delivery stage is very much about keeping that project on track, keeping the momentum going, and influencing key stakeholders. And the design stage is very much co-designing those improvements together, sort of prototyping and testing them. So very much mirroring the process that we've gone through, because most of the work that we do with frontline is experience-based co-design. So that's how we work with teams. And we also have an open program in end-of-life care at the moment, which we run in collaboration with NHS England and is funded by the Health Foundation. And it focuses on end-of-life care in generalist settings rather than palliative care settings. So we are recruiting new sites. So if that's anything anybody would like to know about, please do get in touch. We are open for applications until the end of the month. And as Catherine mentioned, we do run training on experience-based co-design specifically, a full-day workshop. And the next one is on the 5th of May in central London. So if you'd like to know any more details about that, please do get in touch and we can share that with you. So I think we've had a couple more comments.
It was just one more from Hazel.
Yes.
And talking about how maybe people feel that small issues are not worth starting an EBCD project for, but it's got to be a large project, and in fact small changes may lead to large changes. I think that's a really key point, and maybe the way that I've said that some of the things can be quite small is picks up on that. So I think that that you're right, that actually people want to be able to demonstrate large impact. That's kind of the way in which we are primed these days. But that this is about gaining real insight into how people are really experiencing our services. And we are putting a lot of effort into all over the place, changing services and making some pretty large changes. And in that context, we need to be paying attention to how people feel about it. So therefore, you could use elements of experience-based co-design to give you that insight. And that might highlight small things that are important to people. But actually, if you find small things that are important and they're things that can be addressed, then actually dealing with those would be extremely powerful. So maybe don't talk about size too much, but talk about the way in which we will be paying attention to what is really significant for people. And we can't assume that we know that just by being people who provide services. We have to keep checking with people about what is important to them.
I'm going to put it better myself. So we'll draw it to a close there because we are now at 3 o'clock. But thank you all very much for tuning in. I hope that's been informative. Thank you very much, Catherine, for telling us all about experience-based co-design and all of your experiences. So if you've got any more questions or if there's any more information we can provide, please do get in touch. In fact, I will move it onto the slide that has our contact details on. And thank you very much.